Okay, afternoon session of Anthropology lecture number 4. Folks, settle down quickly, please. Hi, it's the 9th of September 2020. This is a lecture on Evans Pritchard. Edward Evans Pritchard. You will see his surname is hyphenated. We call it a double barrel surname. 2 barrels of the shotgun. Joke. But people do call it a double barrel surname. Nowadays, that's quite common. In English, anyway. I don't know about tiếng Việt. No, I haven't seen. Hi, can you join us? Yeah. I don't know about in TV, but in English now, it used to be that the wife, in getting married, would take the name of the husband. But, now, sometimes, if you get married at all, not everyone in England get married anymore, you keep your own name or make a new name of the 2 surnames. So, if I married my partner, or if you are in a marriage relationship, you can, if you want, choose to have it in any order: husband's surname, wife's surname. But in 1920s, 1930s, UK, 1940s even, it wasn't common to do that, but except in the upper class, because upper class families, they were a bit proud of their name, right? Even the women from those families had a reputation from the great families of England, so they kept their name when they went into a marriage, which was also something like an economic alliance. So the double barrel surname was a kind of marker of status, upper class status. Actually, it wasn't true for Malinowski, right? But Malinowski came from Poland, right? He didn't come from the English ruling class, aristocracy. I mean, about Malinowski's name, it's interesting and fun to know that Edmund Leach said he should anglicize his surname. He should make his surname more like an English one. And they suggested that because Malinowski, right? Malina means raspberry. He should go for a Scottish sounding name, McRaspberry. Would be very funny. Worse than McDonald Duck, McRaspberry. Joke doesn't translate across culture, but that's okay. One anthropologist I didn't tell you about that was a contemporary of Malinowski, but I should have probably said something about, was Radcliffe Brown. He wrote a book called The Andaman Islands. Okay, Andaman Islands were sort of Burma, India, Nicobar and Andaman Islands. And on the island of, one of the island group of the Andamans, the British kept the island as a colonial prison for keeping the anti-colonial or the independence movement leaders. You know that this happens, right? The French had done the same on the island of Condau. And in fact, it's very, very similar in some respects. So, okay, cellular jail was not like the tiger cages, but it was a panoptic kind of jail, a central observation platform looking out in several spokes. So the prisoners always thought they were being watched. And similar to Condau, the prisoners who were the anti-colonial movement said it was a kind of school of the sea. And Tonduk Tang, the person who this university is named after, of course, was somehow the leader of the school of the party school inside Condau prison for 15 years. And they say that that's where some revolutionaries, well, they became revolutionaries, or they really learned their Marxism or party order there. The same with cellular jail. I mean, for Condau prison, right, if you see even a famous French film like Indochine, made with French money and so on, and from a French perspective, really kind of exoticist thing about Vietnam. Even in that film, the woman who is the main character gets sent to Condau, and they say about her, well, she will either die or come back a revolutionary. They are acknowledging that this was a revolutionary school. And cellular jail in the Andamans also was considered a Marxism school for the Indian revolutionaries, the Revolutionary Socialist Party and so on. But Radcliffe Brown went and did his field work, have a look for yourself, on that island. And some of the people he interviewed in his field work were in chains as he interviewed them, which is pretty shocking when you think about what it is that someone who's, you know, in prison and in a political prison, a school prison, thinking about anti-colonialism, what will they say to the representative of the government when they come to interview them? Tell me about, you know, your culture or whatever. What will they say? Some don't tell the enemy anything. Hey, where's my PowerPoint? So I'm going to talk about Evans Pritchard. His double-barrel name, like Radcliffe Brown, but also what I'm saying is Radcliffe Brown's assumptions are similar. His surname is similar, his upper class background is similar, but also his assumptions are similar to those that Evans Pritchard has. And the big context for this, and I'll talk about this at the very end, but I want to put it in your minds at the start, is the Second Imperialist World War. Or you know it as World War II, right? But notice this, I'm calling it the Second Imperialist World War for a reason. And the reason is that, well, how to explain? Oh yeah, you understand the United States police action in Vietnam between early 1960s up until 1975 as the American War, right? But Americans call it the Vietnam War. And they make 10-part drama series about how heroic they were, and Sylvester Stallone, Rambo came and saved. Well, they lost, but still Rambo is the hero. Anyway, whatever. But The thing is, you call it the American War, they call it the Vietnam War. There's a reason for that, right? To remove the name of America from, you know, we say the American War because the Americans were the aggressors. They were in the wrong. They were invading. To call it the Vietnam War, from that side, the Americans are kind of saying those Vietnamese, they were the troublemakers, being communist, threatening to have a say in their own government and to influence other local political powers. And God, we have to invade. All right, whatever. I want to call World War II not World War II, but the Second Imperialist World War, to remind ourselves that that was a war of superpowers, Germany, England, France, America, Soviet Union, and Japan, which was fought in the colonial countries, in Africa, in Turkey, in the Middle East, in China, in the Pacific Islands, right? It was an imperialist war fought in the colonial territories. So that's why it's the Second Imperialist World War, because First World War was also imperialist countries, European countries. And the other aspect to this is that because Japan was one of the belligerent and the powers, the Japanese actually defeated some of the European powers. For the first time, people saw this, saw that Europe was tearing itself apart again, second time in 25 years or whatever. And this time, an Asian power was disrupting and defeating the power of Europe. Okay, so I'm going to talk about that towards the end, but I want to put that in your mind as a kind of reminder, something to think of while we talk about Evans Pritchard and his fieldwork. I also have some keywords. Comparison. Now my question is, what is it to compare societies, right? So what Evans Pritchard will do, we'll see, is he talks about the comparative method, and he wants to compare his group, the Noor that he studies, with the Azande or with the Trobrianders or the Andamans. Right, so he's in this tradition coming from Malinowski and Radcliffe Brown. Radcliffe Brown studies the Andaman Islanders, Malinowski, the Trobriand Islanders, Firth, the Tikopia, other anthropology, Maya Fortes, African political system may be a little different, but other anthropologists all had their chosen sites of studies and their chosen people that they studied. Now, what is it to do comparative work at the level of whole societies? And I'm sorry to pick on you who've just come in, just sat down, but I want to give an example of how we think when we think comparatively. So, remember, the anthropologists are thinking in terms of whole societies. But I think this process, this comparative gesture, happens at all levels. So what Evans Pritchard will tell us is that we are always doing comparative work. And sometimes we are conscious of it, and sometimes we are not conscious of it. But we should try to be more conscious of our comparisons, that they are always working for us. So the last person in gets to be the example. Look, hi, sorry to pick on you, but this person has come late. This one person, well, there is two. And what I have done by focusing on them, they haven't noticed yet, but yeah, what you do is already comparative. Because even though I'm saying our comrade here is late to class, what you are all doing and what I am doing is thinking, well, that person was late, everyone else was not. You see, it's already comparative. I have made a comparison between the person who was late and everyone who was not late. Now, we always do that. We are always doing comparison. That's what language does. That's what thinking is. Think about, right, so I need some. The Andaman Islands was in 1922, right? Evans Pritchard, 1940. We can divide up things in many different ways, but it's still comparative. Again, we could say people who are already here and people who've come late, and you're thinking comparatively. But I could choose something else. Instead of focusing on people here, I could say people who are sitting wearing black t-shirts versus people wearing white shirts versus people with colored shirts, and make a comparison. So if I say you've got a yellow shirt, yeah, bang. It's different to a blue shirt. Even by saying your shirt is yellow, you must know a whole series of other shirts in the room, other colored shirts in the room to think yellow. To think about this one, you must think comparatively. Okay, if you are some other category, anything, a tribal group, a people, what are you? You are Vietnamese, right? All of you? You already had to think without thinking. You didn't really have to think about this, but you are Vietnamese compared to Thai, Burmese, Australian, English, whatever. Every thought is comparative. So Evans Pritchard then will tell us what has been learned by the comparative method. Not much. But we are always doing comparison of anything. I'll come back to this. So what is being compared? But also, what values are being deployed? So when I say someone has come late, and that makes you think in comparison to the people who did not come late, the value that is being smuggled in is my little teacher habit of thinking, yes, everyone should come on time, right? Now, it might be that someone couldn't get parking because the university doesn't make very good access for motorcycle parking. There could have been a jam. Lunch could have been too crowded. Family troubles, and a whole lot of different things could be the reason. But I made the smuggled value judgment that one should turn up on time to class, and I made you think that. Could have been something else. I could have said, at last we have someone with a red shirt in the class, finally. And that wouldn't have been a value judgment. No, that would have been a different kind of value judgment. That was saying red shirts are good, I like communism, etc., or something like that. There is always what we call an agenda in any kind of definition, any kind of comparison. So what I want to work out in today's class is what is the agenda that Evans Pritchard has when he shows us his photographs of the Nua. Right, in his book, the book is called The Nua. Now, the Nua is the identity of the people he studies. All right, they are indigenous. You know what indigenous means? From this land, from this place, an indigenous, original, whatever, indigenous, transhumanant, Neolithic people. All right, transhumanant, what does it mean? Neolithic. It means, right, these are the Nuer people who care a lot about cattle. Don't know if I can draw a cow. No, looks like a pig. They have cattle, and they live half the time up on the mountain in the summer months, because in the plains it's too hot and dry, there's no grass, so they take the cows up to the mountains for 6 months, and then in the winter they go down, the rains come, they eat the grass with the cows, they eat the grass on the plains. So they are living in two places, they are transhumanant. Right? They have a calendar cycle, and they live in these two places. Okay, so the Nuer is the people, but the people are the Nuer because they are a tribal group. And they live in villages, but they're mobile villages, they're in two different villages, and they are a tribe. But that's a kind of question. So, identity, and whether or not you can describe character from identity. Can you describe a people, the tribe, the Nuer? Because, you know, all right, can you say what it is to be Vietnamese? Or what it is to be Australian? I mean, your experience of Australians is not just me, I hope. But if it was just me, that would give you a pretty bad idea of what it is to be Australian, because I'm not, I think I am typical, but I'm not typical. Now, are you typical Vietnamese? Each one I can pick? Probably not. Can I generalize from my experience of Vietnamese people to say what a Vietnamese person is? I think it's very difficult. Okay, can you generalize with smaller identities? What about, you are also students, right? Everyone is a student here. Can we say what it is to be a student? Yeah, but not exactly. What will you choose to pick on for a student? I will say a student is someone who reads all the reading and does all the work and everything is on time. They come to class on time. And you might say a student is someone at a university who, yes, has to go to class sometimes, but mostly is here to do theatre or you know, do student stuff, work on a school magazine or I don't know what. You might say, well, you work through doing what you can, but you don't have to come to everything. There are so many different ways of being a student. All right, what about being a woman or a man? Many different ways, of course. And in between, LGBTQIA+, whatever, transgendered identities are showing us that to describe any one thing for sure, for certain, is very difficult. So we make assumptions about identity. Assumptions is the next key word. I didn't write much down about assumptions because assumptions are always there. Like the assumption I made when people came late to class, I assumed that was because they weren't so interested or so on, but I could have assumed, oh, there's traffic jam. Right? Your assumptions, you are more or less conscious of them. Some of them are habitual. You don't even notice that you're making them. Some you can be clear about. Another key concept that I want to bring into this is pacification. What it means to arrive, like Evans Pritchard does, to do your field work when the people are in a process of pacification. They are being subjected to military occupation by a colonial power and prevented from resisting that. They are being made peaceful by military means. Hugely contradictory. Of course, it's what happened in Vietnam too. When the French came, they fought for a while. Vietnam fought back, and then it had to gather strength. Again, later, fought back, of course. You were never really pacified, but there was a period where the French got away with, well, I'm not an expert on this history, but most colonial systems have experienced that. Malinowski, remember, he arrived with the police. If Malinowski had done his fieldwork 15 years earlier, the Trobrianders were a warlike people. They were fighting small battles between each other. I think things would not have been quite so peaceful in Malinowski's tent. He could have sat around not reading novels, but worrying about whether he was going to get a spear in the side of his neck or whatever. Pacification enabled anthropologists to go and study culture. We'll see how that is important. Now, Evans Pritchard said, what's been achieved by the use of the comparative method? Certainly little. He's complaining that people have not been so aware that they always are making comparison. When you identify that person in the yellow shirt, or that person who came late, or that word, not this word, you are making the process of understanding, the phenomenon of understanding is comparative. But we necessarily are not aware of that all the time. If we were always aware of how we make comparisons, we'd be overthinking it. Right? But it does raise a problem. If we're not aware of our assumptions, and we must be, some of our assumptions must be put to the back of must become habitual. We can't be conscious of them all at the same time, but that raises a problem for what it is about any people that we decide to highlight, decide to use in our description, compared to something else. Like, I chose to use the color of shirts to describe my point. It really might not matter at all what color shirt someone wears. But I focused on it because that's what I can see. My assumption is I can use examples like that and you'll grasp them because you also see color differences. Of course, not everyone sees color in the same way. Just the similarity between blue and green is a problem for. But how do you make statements that describe a people? Like, do you think you now could say something about the Australian people just from what I do, what you see me doing? Australian people are, I don't know what. Someone once said, friendly like koalas. Or, you think koalas are friendly? You know what a koala is? Koala, little bear like this. You think it's cute? No, it's not cute. They scratch. They smell really bad. And they will wee on you. They will wee on you as a weapon. They are not so cute. They are not cuddly. You do not want to hold a koala. It will scratch you. Worse than a cat. And it smells, and they all have a disease called chlamydia. A sexually transmitted disease. That's a problem for koalas. Koalas, it's amazing that that anyone in the world, and everyone nearly, thinks they're cute. Because if you know them really, they smell. They are not cute. I mean, they look cute, but their behavior is not like a kitten or a pet. Anyway, the problem there for description for anthropologists is if you know a little bit about someone, can you generalize? And in a comparative system, can you then make statements about, like Evans Pritchard does, tribal people are like this, and he means not just the Nuer, but other transhuman tribal people. He generalizes from his observation, but his observation is, remember the context? He arrives as they are being pacified. So we can think about a major theme in anthropological statements, that's comparison. And that's the nature of describing society. I think it applies for sociology as well, right? Even for history. From Herodotus, who is the Greek travel writer, whatever, onwards, up to today. When you talk about your, I don't know what, I wrote recently about going to Condal for, was a holiday, I suppose, so travel writing. Of course it was comparative. For other travels, for other holidays, for other islands, for other prison museums, for other things that I've written about. In so many ways, it was always comparative. So that's a real framework for how we think and write. Now can we examine how that raises problems for what it is that we do? There are many, many kinds of comparison. Self and other and other. Man and woman, yellow shirt, blue shirt, black shirt, late, early. And different levels of generalization and varying levels of boundedness. Boundedness? Okay, so when you make a comparison, you must draw a boundary around an object, a group or something, so that you can compare it with another thing. Always we do this. So yellow shirts or blue shirts, I made a boundary at the level of shirts and color. Or, yeah, look at my writing here. We can make a boundary, we can make a comparison between how I write numbers, not very neat, well, and how I write letters, also not very neat, but joined up writing, figures. We've made a comparison between two things that now are different. Before I drew the boundary around them, they were the same. It was just writing on the board. Now they are different things. But I could draw the boundary differently, couldn't I? I could say things that happened before 1930, well, things that happened after 1930. Or I could, what else could I do? Things that are names in the Andamans, and things that are concepts. Names and dates. Different ways you can draw a circle around things, or you can draw a circle around all of this and call it meaning and compare it to nonsense, anything. But the thing is, we have to make a comparison, we have to draw a boundary around a thing. Whether we do it consciously or just out of habit. I mean, that's what language does. That is the process of perception. And then, of course, we make generalizations on the basis of these boundaries that are largely invented. I just invented 5 different ways of dividing up, chalk on the board, something simple. But there are at least 5 ways of dividing up, chalk on the board today. Imagine when it's a complex thing like a kind of people, a culture, with so many different things you could divide up. I mean, to the point that you start to think about your assumptions and the values that shape what you choose to divide and describe, how would you even start? It's hard. So there are certain categories that anthropologists start with and they deploy to, just because you have to start somewhere, right? And they start, at least in the 1930s and 1940s, they started with this idea that an anthropologist goes and studies a culture. The Trobriands, the Andamans, the Tikopia, the Balinese, the Nua, the Andamans, the Vietnamese, the Japanese, whatever. Okay, so I talk a little bit about Vietnamese anthropology later today and later in this course. But the idea that you could anthropologize the Vietnamese should also make you suspicious of anyone who tries to anthropologize, to say anything really about the complexity of the culture of Vietnam, to try and describe a whole culture is like as crazy as you can imagine. No one could get it into one book. So how could an anthropologist get the Nua or the Trobrianders or the Andamans into one book? That book should be really big. Okay, so, but he must start to do this. It's his job. He's an anthropologist. He must start to describe. So anthropologists generally have some categories. And in the 30s and 40s, they had some pretty basic categories. Tribal names, groups, tribes. They were studying tribes because that was not the natural, what's natural? Not the indigenous divisions, but the ones that were evolved in the colonial context. The British looked for tribal leaders to be able to negotiate with. And the old system of politics in those societies was displaced by the elevation of tribal leadership and the idea of tribal groups. Because, right, the Nua, we talk about the Nua, we talk about the Nua who live in Africa, right? Here's Africa. Sort of. Not really. And here's the Nile, and the Sudan is here. Right, it's a conflict zone now, one of the world's ongoing wars, supported by Saudi Arabia, Israeli and French arms. And in the current war, it's the Nua versus Dinka, largely, fighting in the Sudan. Nua and Dinka were the main, in the 1930s, the main tribal groups that anthropologists went and studied. Now they have become dominant groups within Sudanese culture and they are fighting. But some people say of Evans Pritchard that he misunderstood this transhuman culture, and really, instead of just focusing on the Nua, drawing a boundary there for comparison, he should have thought about Nua Dinka as a social unit. How to understand this? In the work of Condominus, has anyone heard of Condominus? Condominus, anyone? No one? Okay, so Condominus is one of the best Vietnamese anthropologists. Mother was Vietnamese, father was French, I think. And he worked in the highlands with the Jarai. I'm not sure if I pronounce it properly. Jarai, in the Central Highlands. But somehow his argument is that you can't really understand the Jarai without understanding Cham. That the cultures, one was rural highland society, and one was coastal Hindu-influenced civilization, but really they were in an economic system together. Somehow, the Nu and Dinka are more like that. You can't just study the Dinka, you have to study the Dinka and the Nuer. But because of the way anthropologists and the government focused on the leaders of the Nuer and the leaders of the Dinka, they became separate political groups. Anyway, we have other categories. The name of the tribe. We also have other basic assumptions that we can talk about. Men and women. Well, by the 1930s, anthropological study of myth, totemism, and things like that had gone a bit out of fashion. But you could talk about men and women, you could talk about initiation, so youth, how you become a man, marriage rights, how you become a wife, not how you become a woman, how you become a wife. Later, people studied how to become a woman. That was different. Feminism had to come later. Young and old. But even these descriptions of what it is to be a man or a woman or young or old, they were comparative, right? Man, woman, it's automatically comparative, the biggest division of labor. So now what I'm going to do, so what I'm going to do for this section is to look at Evans Pritchard's book, In the Nuer, and look at his photographs. Now, he's a more interesting, is he a more interesting photographer than Malinowski? I think he's a better photographer than Malinowski, but not necessarily always. Here's one of the early photographs of two Nuer men. And it has a caption. Like, the photograph says a lot about what the topic is. These are Nuer people. Understand that these are Nuer tribal people. But you also get a little caption that he includes under the photograph to tell you what you're seeing. So it's not just up to you to say, oh, look, naked African men. He also tells you what you see, but in this one, it's a little bit weird because look at the photo. All right, it's a little bit stretched in the representation because of this strange thing. But it says Sandy Ridge, okay. It's sandy, I accept. It looks sandy. Ridge with cattle buyers on the horizon. A cattle buyer is where you keep your cows in the night. A kind of grass tent, hut. But I don't see them. Can you see them? On the horizon, just looks like a straight line to me. If I had a stick, can I borrow your ruler? Oh, a bit short. What's wrong with 12 inches? No, doesn't help. Anyone got a full 12 inch? Nice. Okay, not to worry. You see on the horizon at this side, maybe there's a little smudge that could be the cattle buyer on the. Why has he included that? That's crazy. But he has identified the people. So the photo kind of says to you, look, these are tribal people. Africans, no clothes, etc. Right? In the same way, with this Pratipchai man, can you see that he's... No, you can't. This youth, the photograph simply is captioned youth. Like if I took a photo of you and underneath I put youth, would that tell us much? We can tell he's young. He also, the camera again doesn't show you everything. He's quite attractive, quite good looking young man. This one is captioned man. And you know, in Africa, that's the significance of that. A photograph of a man from Africa, which is where humanity comes from, right? They say that humanity begins in Africa and then moved out to Asia and to Europe and so on. So in this book, he has a photograph of a man and underneath it's captioned man. You know, there are some assumptions here. The assumption that we are looking at the beginning of the human race, the originals, maybe. It's far too simple. Of course, he's a man, and you can see a cattle buyer behind him, and he's a man with some spears, and he's going hunting or something, we can assume. Okay, they are complex as well. In the next photograph, we have a very attractive Noor boy, Noor youth, with a great smile. He's a warrior, like a fighter. It's very significant that he's called a warrior. Remember this. He's a warrior, but he's doing something like to do with fashion. Fixing a giraffe hair necklace on his friend. Okay, this one is interesting. Comparative-wise, you immediately, consciously or not, think, oh, they are doing fashion or they're exchanging some gift or something. And maybe you've done the same. Fashion attached, helped someone put on their necklace or their keychain or lanyard or tie or something. It's like the comparative thing here is, look at this African youth. He's doing something basically human, typically human. So we've got evidence of that in the book through a photograph. The same with the main thing that the Noor do, right? Their whole life completely revolves around looking after cattle. Milking a restless cow. Okay, the cow would not stay still so that he could take a photograph. Remember, in those days, a camera was quite a big box. You had to carry it quite big. So he's standing there in front, standing about where you are with the yellow shirt, trying to take the photograph, and the cow has wandered away. So the next one, he had to draw the cows. And you know, thinking of comparison, the Noor make comparisons among cows that we do not make. Like they care if a cow is brown or black or white or blue or what. And we mostly just think, do you think about the color of cows ever? All right, pop quiz. How many people think about what color are cows? What color, Mao, they are, what color are cows? Bowl. Brown, white, black. Okay, but brown. Anyone else? What color are cows? Not these cows, just your cows. Vietnamese bowl. What color are they? If you study English, when you were studying English at school, did they make you say, how now, brown cow? That's to make your mouth get around the vowels that you don't use in Tiếng Viet. How now, brown cow? It's to exercise your mouth, to do that, again, that twisting of the jaw to a different sound system. But in Nuland, they make distinctions between brown and black, white and black, white and tawny, tawny brown, dark brown. They make a whole series of distinctions because cows are very important to them. More important to them than to us. So we just think brown cow, black cow, white cow. If we saw a blue cow, we'd be a bit shocked, but we wouldn't really care much about it. That's the end of it, right? But they know, they distinguish not only the color, also the pattern of the coloring. You see more white on the back, more speckled. We definitely don't do that. If you see a cow with a spot on its back or on its front, do you may think it's a different kind of cow? No, they do. That's fantastic that they do. Interesting. Because a different status for the cows. Now, Evans Pritchard, he did learn about the Nua a lot. And of course, crucial, most important, cattle for them was all consuming, the central issue. And so in his book, the first chapter had to be about cattle. And this is the photograph he used to show you cattle. Picture of a beautiful girl with a cow. There's a real problem with this, a bit like Malinowski's photographs of young girls. The photograph, which Geertz refers to as black and white in color charm, is pretty sexist. But not only that, when he talks about gardens, he also has another. And this one, this photo is the one that really disturbs me. Now, I don't know if it translates across culture, but can I say that this woman, the caption says girl, does not like to be photographed like this? It looks to me like she is not happy to have this photograph taken. It looks like what you are feeling right now because I am looking at what you're doing. You don't want it to happen, right? You don't want that to happen. She doesn't want that photographer to be in her face. Sorry, just giving an example. He doesn't want her. She doesn't want him taking that photo. But here's the anthropologist. He thinks he has the right to do so. A bit like, I am the teacher, so I can do this. Example number one, or something like that. Now, that's, sorry to do that, but a bit weird. Why should this visitor from outside be able to do that? He should be a guest in their culture, a guest in their society. And he is describing them. He can't even photograph a cow properly. Well, eventually, actually, he does. On the picture on the left-hand side, he finally gets one cow in shot. But it's not in the chapter, Interesting Cattle. It's like on page 250. It's towards the end of the book. But what he writes about in this section is initiation, which is very interesting in terms of comparison, because the difference between a youth and a man that was in at the beginning, right? We had a picture of youth and a picture of man. How do you get from youth to man? In societies like this, we have an initiation process. And Evans Pritchard just studies and wants to describe that for us. What is the initiation process? Where the young men of the tribe are taken out of the society of boys, taken away for a number of days, 4 or 5, taught some adult knowledge, some secrets of the tribe, and given some cuts on their forehead which signify that they are adults. Similar things didn't happen in other societies. In the Arunta, in Australia, you get a spear through the thigh. It has to go in this side and out this side. And you have a scar and you have to recover from that. That makes you a man. Right? You should not cry, etc., etc. Shows you're tough. We do the same thing. We have rituals to show the difference between childhood and adulthood. What are they? Marriage. I mean, 2 people are going to be adults together, and we go through this whole rigmarole of a ceremony of getting married. 15 changes of clothes and a cake and champagne and a tower of glasses. All these ridiculous things. Well, the champagne is not ridiculous. It's quite delicious. But why does 15 changes of clothes, a ceremony with a priest, certain dance, a waltz, and all this, right? I've only been to a couple of weddings. I don't know what else goes on. But it's a ceremony, a ritual of activities that you don't really need to be an adult, but which say to society, now your status has changed. You are a married man. You are a married woman. You have responsibilities. You're going to make a family. No longer just a youth. Or, I mean, for us now, modern society, it's less structured, but we still have funny ceremonies. You are students now, but you will finish being students and you will become of a different status, unless you plagiarize in my class, when you will fail. But if you pass, and you pass your degree, then you go through a ceremony dressed in special clothes, your university robes, which are very old-fashioned, and you go and meet the Vice-Chancellor, if he is not removed by the government, and you shake his hand, and you go past the stage, and you have a piece of paper that says you are a graduate of the university. You are a different status. You have a BA or a doctorate or whatever. We also do this initiation process, which distinguishes the categories. And then you can, if you don't do the initiation well, if on your university graduation, instead of shaking the hand of the Vice-Chancellor, I don't know what you could do that would mean that they would take back your degree. I don't know, you make an obscene gesture, or you hug and kiss him, or do something wrong. Nowadays, people probably clap and reward you for that. The idea is, oh yeah, in a marriage, if you don't go through with that final part of the marriage which says, I do, and you run out from that, you don't consummate the marriage in the right way, it's not status. You've broken that ritual moment. I don't think even that would stop you from being an adult, but now. But for this culture, traditional culture, these guys, they can only be adults if they've gone through this initiation and got the cuts. That's what signifies being a man. In the army, you get your stripe. I don't know, different armies have different things. In so many of our everyday life activities, we do have a ritual element to distinguish before and after. Untrained and trained. Degree and not degree. All right, finally Evans Pritchard manages to show an African man doing something. Action photography with fishing in the shallows. I will talk about World War, Second Imperialist War, after we have a little break. If you need to use the bathroom, please do. I will say before we break, because some people came late, of 47 or whatever it is students in this class, only 9 completed the assignment this week. And several of them were plagiarized. Unacceptable. Plagiarism will get 0. 0 score. And if you don't do this, the assignment is worth, your process is worth 30% of the assignment. If you get 0 for it, when you're not doing it, or by plagiarizing, copying in any way, and copying not to cheat yourself, not to cheat me, and not to put at risk the university reputation. Because if a newspaper got hold of the story that TDT students do not write their own essays, that will be the end. If you don't get that 30%, then you're trying to pass with just 70% on your final and your midterm. And it'll be very difficult. Please do the assignments. Okay, 5-minute break. I'll stop the recording and come back in 5 minutes.